Okay, so we're live. I'm gonna give 3 minutes so that people can connect. And I'm actually gonna speak in Spanish for a tiny bit. I'm sorry.
Okay, I understand un poquito, so.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, estamos ya en vivo. Vamos a dar unos. Dime. Okay, I'm back. So, Spanish. Hola, ya estamos en vivo. Vamos a dar unos 3 minuticos para que las personas que están pendientes de entrar puedan ingresar. Hoy nos acompaña la doctora Linfielin de la Universidad de Yale. Voy a hacer una breve introducción acerca de ella y de su perfil y después le voy a dar la palabra para que podamos iniciar. Entonces, en 2 minutos comenzamos. Bueno, bienvenidos a todos. Como ustedes saben, la doctora Fielin habla en inglés, entonces voy a su introducción en inglés y de ahí podemos empezar. Dr. Fielin, just so you know, most of the people watching you speak English and what you're trying to say. So I'm going to start your introduction. So Dr. Fielin is a professor of medicine at the Yale School of Medicine at the Yale Child Study Center and at the Yale School of Public Health. Her work focuses on developing and testing novel video game interventions to promote health and risk in youth and young adults, evaluating interactive evidence-based games, and are addressing a number of health-related and medical issues, which include HIV prevention and risk reduction, HIV testing and counseling, tobacco and marijuana smoking, e-cigarette use and vaping prevention, and most recently, they have been working in a project with opioid misuse prevention in adolescents. So for us, it's a pleasure to have you here with us, Lynn. I will be connected in the Zoom meeting with you, and we already have several participants connected through the Facebook live stream, to the YouTube live stream, I'm sorry. So I think we're ready to go. I will note all the questions and comments that are published, and I will read them to you at the end of your presentation. So welcome, and you can begin. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Isa. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm really happy to talk about the work that we're doing at the Play to Prevent Lab. And just a side note, we were lucky enough to have Isa working with us, and she continues to be a collaborator, was just such value added to the work that we're doing. So again, happy to be here and tell you about all that work that we are doing. So just a quick disclosure, in addition to my roles at Yale, I am founder and equity holder of a spin-out company from my lab called PLAYBL that focuses on the marketing and distribution of our video game interventions. So this is my outline for the talk that I'm going to give today. And really it's about telling a story. I think that when people talk about their careers and how they got to where they are, it's really interesting to hear about their stories, and stories resonate with people. And quite frankly, the work that we do in the lab is so heavily story-based that I think it fits with the theme of telling stories. So I'm going to start with talking about how we got to today and my research program at the Play to Prevent lab. So we'll start with how did we get here in terms of my lab, where we develop, evaluate, and implement video game interventions targeting the most critical health outcomes in teens. Then I will describe the problems that we're solving with these games, or hope to solve, and tell you about our process for developing our games and the evidence that we've produced to demonstrate. And then finally, a little bit about how we went on to spin out a new company, but really what the focus is of that company in terms of building other technologies that augment what we're doing in the lab. So first, I'd like to start the story ways back to answer the question, how did we get here? So I started my research career at Yale over 20 years ago now in the area of treatment for adults around health outcomes, particularly focused on addiction and HIV. But the more I worked with these patients who are either struggling with addiction or HIV, either in my research or my clinical work, the more I heard their stories about how they ended up with their challenges and struggles as young adults, and how most of those risk behaviors occurred during adolescence. And I often heard them say, if only I knew then what I know now, I'd really know how to deal with things differently. And at the same time, at home, I was raising 3 wonderful but very adolescent teens with all the joys and big challenges of growing adolescence. And it got me thinking that I really felt like I had been working downstream from the problem. I'd been looking at treatment models for adults, folks who were already struggling with these issues, and that to really get at the root of the problem, I had to move upstream. And so in 2008, I looked at going in a new direction towards a new method of delivering messages for behavior change that was most attractive to those at highest risk, to seize a window of opportunity before risk starts in a younger age group. And I wanted to move from developing treatment models for adults to developing risk reduction and prevention models for adolescents. At the same time, there was growing momentum in the area of serious games, which are defined as games for a purpose other than just entertainment. And given that upwards of 97% of teens were playing video games, and that has persisted, it seemed like an opportunity. And while this was being demonstrated sort of in the world around me, I was also seeing it in my own backyard, in my own home. Everyone was on a device, a console, a computer, playing games. They were captivated. And they were a captive audience. These are 2 of my kids. And so they were really, in some ways, a major inspiration, along with my patient stories, for my thinking about how video games could be used to connect with teens where they are, where they want to be, to deliver them something healthy in terms of accurate knowledge and skills. And so at that time, I submitted and received a large grant from the National Institutes of Health proposing to develop and evaluate a video game intervention targeting risk reduction and HIV prevention in younger teens. And this game became the first of our 5 games targeting, again, critical health outcomes in teens. And in order to accomplish this work around this first game that I just received funding for, I established the Play to Prevent lab, again, where we develop and evaluate and implement video games that impact health behavior, social intelligence, and education in teens and young adults. And a critical first step was to build our multidisciplinary team that I coined our collective brain, and that not any one of us can do this work alone. And you can see here we have folks on the science side. Critically, on the community side, this list has grown exponentially in terms of schools, school-based programs in Connecticut and around the country, as well as institutional partners and game development partners. And everyone is really a crucial part of this work. And so I've described the focus of our first video game intervention, which was called Play Forward Elm City Stories, focusing again generally on risk reduction and HIV prevention in a younger group of teens. But generally, what problems are we solving with our video game interventions? So these are US data, but I think we know this transcends globally. So every year in the US, over 2 million adolescents struggle with substance misuse, 5 million youth have at least one mental health issue, and 10 million teens contract a sexually transmitted infection. And since most of our work has been in schools, and schools are really where kids spend a huge amount of their time and receive education as well as health education, we have seen that there's a dismal scarcity of support in schools for students. And you can see here a ratio of 1 school counselor for over 490 students and 1 school psychologist for over 1,400 students. And so that's a huge problem in terms of helping youth with this array of major issues they're dealing with. And so to solve these problems and hopefully fill some of these gaps in resources, these are 5 games. I'm incredibly proud of the rigor of the process, which I'll tell you a little bit about, and are developing these games and the strong evidence we've been able to produce to demonstrate their impact. You can see our first game, Play Forward, which focuses on risk reduction and HIV prevention in a group of younger teens. It's about 16 hours of gameplay. Smoke Screen focuses on smoking and vaping, including e-cigarettes. It's about 3 to 4 hours of gameplay for kind of a middle 10 to 16-year-old teens. Empower Ed focuses on mental health and wellness. That's a much smaller game focusing on high school students, so sort of the 14 to 18 year range. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. Our most recent game, which is Play Smart, focuses on mental health and opioid misuse. That's about 6 to 8 hours of gameplay for an age group of 16 to 19. And finally, Play Test is our game that focuses on general health advocacy, helping teens learn how to be their own agents in their healthcare, as well as testing for sexually transmitted infections and HIV. And that's again for more of a high school age group. 14 to 18 is about 6 hours of gameplay. So I'm going to talk briefly about the development process. I could talk for days about this because it's evolved into so many different methods and systems to accomplish what we do in developing our games, but just to kind of give you an overview. So first we had to develop a platform on which most of our games subsequently were built, a combination of stories and narratives, graphic novel style, highly engaging, interfacing with a number of mini games, which is where really the skill building takes place in what we aim to have as being a compelling and engaging manner. And then key to our process is that it is 100% user-centered design. We involve our team partners in every step of the development process, literally from day one. The only way that we're going to capture their voices and their stories is to have them be a major part of the design and the development of these games. And then subsequently, since they are our target audience, they also help with the evaluation of the games. So this ends up involving many interviews, focus groups, and for any of you who have either worked with teens or raised them, it can be challenging to get them to talk about themselves. And so we have had to develop some creative methods to engage them, and a couple I will discuss here. So this is one of my favorites. This is a graphic that we called the party scene. We had it actually drawn specifically for our first project. With the goal is that we wanted to have an image created that didn't really represent overtly risky behaviors, but that stories could be pulled out of looking at this graphic. And so we gave this drawing literally to just a group of 12 teens in a focus group and simply asked, what do you think is going on here? And the stories that came from them were just astonishing. I mean, it just really, they really sort of betrayed what was going on in the lives and the landscapes of these teens. And really served as the stories for our first game, Play Forward Elm City Stories. So for example, if you look back sort of in the center, you see a little girl who's talking to a boy and she's looking at her watch. And in that focus group, over 85% of the girls in that focus group said she had just found out she was pregnant, which was really stunning, given that, I mean, not that we're surprised that teenagers are thinking about pregnancy, but it really said something about what was kind of forefront in their minds and in their lives. And so this method really helped us to better understand what is prominent in their lives and hear it directly from them, as opposed to us, coming up with our own ideas. Another method was our photo feedback project. And so, the last one talked more about generating stories. This is talking more about generating art. And so to create authentic and meaningful artwork for the game, we gave a group of teens, probably 12 or 15 teens, disposable cameras and asked them to just go out into their neighborhoods, into their communities, and take pictures of everything that they saw in their daily life, everything that was important to them, just put it in their hands. And they did this, and they brought back the cameras, which we developed those photos and sent them down to our game developer Shell Games, who is down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And they really translated, as you can see here, those photographs, those images directly into the artwork for the game. So we weren't acting as translators or communicators. We were basically just, communicating their voices directly from them. And this all became the artwork for the game. And everything that we created came back to our participants for their feedback on the artwork. As you can see here, they gave us their comments. They were not shy about telling us what worked and what didn't work. And then iteration. As I said, everything started with them, came back to them. You can see here, this is one of the mini games, which is called People Sense. And then the upper left-hand corner was sort of the first version, and then went through a whole series of iterations to really end up in the bottom right-hand corner was sort of the final mini game. But again, getting feedback from teens every step of the way, feeding that back to Shell Games, and until we got it right. So while this process is ongoing, in order to develop an effective intervention, again, we need to accomplish something that's reproducible. We had to create a conceptual model to translate our intervention components to our final target outcome, which you can see here. Again, part of this is creating something that is authentic and engaging, but it also has to work. So the behavioral science comes in here in terms of creating these conceptual models, and those then end up being built into our overall behavior change manuals, which we've coined the term game playbooks, which is really the method that we use to communicate with our game development team. In these game books, which we create for each of our games, include different aspects of the game development, what theoretical constructs we're using, what we call the player transformation goals, which is what we hope to change in our player, different game mechanics. So this is a living, working document that the scientists and the game developers share, so that we make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of getting, the game to be what we need it to be effective. So that was a rapid fire overview of development. I just wanted to give you some highlights. It's these are methods and systems we've created to really build these games, and we built off of those methods with each subsequent game. And so now I want to talk to you a little bit about the 5 games and what we've done to evaluate them. So first, as I mentioned, Play Forward Elm City Stories is our first game that was funded through that large NIH grant. We've subsequently had 5 or 6 additional NIH grants, as well as foundation funding, to create our other games. This game, again, targeted overall risk reduction, HIV prevention for younger teens, also with the goal of teaching them a better sense of future orientation, that making good decisions based on consequences now and down the road. So they're literally in this game playing forward to see how their actions have immediate and delayed impact. This is an example of a home screen, shows you the different components that make up our games. As you can see, we have 12 story-based narrative challenges and then 5 skill-based mini games that, that the player can choose from as they navigate through the stories. Over in the corner, you can see there's a blue double arrow button, which is our fast forward button, which we've incorporated into other games as well, where at any time in the game, the player can click on the fast forward button, fast forward to their epilogue and see where their character is, what the status of their character is based on decisions they've made throughout the game, but kind of what their status is now at age 30, which of course for most teens feels like a lifetime away, but we help kind of fast forward them so they can see through this almost collage presentation of the epilogue where their character is at. They can then go back into the game, play something different, make different decisions, fast forward again and see that now changed and reflected in their new epilogue. So there's sort of some magical component of being able to see how things change with their decisions. After we completed pilot testing of this game, we conducted a randomized control trial, which is our typical approach to evaluating our games. In this case, we enrolled 333 teens ages 11 to 14 who were assigned to play either Play Forward or a set of control games. And then they played their assigned game for 6 weeks. We collected data at baseline, 6 weeks, 3, 6, 12, and 24 months. And you can see it's kind of hard to see, but happy to share the paper with anyone who is interested from these graphs that at 12 months and actually also at 24 months, which we're currently working on, we saw sustained impact of the Play Forward game on attitudes and knowledge around sexual health. I should say that the games also collect an enormous amount of timestamp data, what we call in-game data that Isa has become very familiar with in other work that we're doing that really represent every action the player takes in the game. And you can see here, we did this early study looking at those in-game data, comparing them to assessment data, sort of the gold standard is sort of self-report assessment data that we collect. And generally from this preliminary analyses from in-game data from the Play Forward game, we could demonstrate that there was good correlation between gains that were accomplished in the game and gains that were reflected in their performance on the standardized assessments. We were also able to demonstrate in a preliminary sort of hypothesis generating way that it was not the amount of time of gameplay, but actually the quality of the gameplay that was most important in terms of the gains that we saw in our assessments. So when people would ask, well, if you see these gains, after they play for 5 hours, then they should just play for 10 hours because you'll see twice the gains. And what we found was that, again, just with this first stab, that wasn't necessarily so. It was how well they played, their performance in the game, not how long they played, that really showed what impact the game had on them. So moving on to our next game, Playtest, which was, again, developed methods that similar to what we use with Play Forward. And Playtest focuses really on health promotion and helping teens become their own health advocates with a specific focus on encouraging them to get HIV testing. And how we kind of turned this game on its head was, while a lot of Play Forward was focused on helping kids negotiate how not to engage in risky behaviors, Playtest focused much more on sort of how to help them engage in healthy behaviors. So it was flipping it kind of from refusing to persuading, helping them learn how to refuse risky situations or risky decisions, to having them learn how to sort of persuade others or themselves how to engage in healthy behaviors. So it was a very interesting sort of exercise to turn it from really prevention to promotion with this game. So we were lucky enough to be awarded funding from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, which is at the National Institutes of Health. We received both a phase 1 and a phase 2 grant. Phase 1 is focused more on pilot work. So we were able to build the playtest game or a prototype of it, and then essentially do some preliminary testing. This is a small sample size, 26 kids, just looked at outcomes at 3 to 6 weeks. You can see we moved the bar a little bit in terms of their intentions to get tested, their knowledge around testing. And even though it's a very small sample size, 26 kids, we were actually able to demonstrate that 2 of them who had never had an HIV test before sought out HIV testing after only several weeks of gameplay. So even though that may not be statistically significant, it really is important for us to have seen that we were getting somewhere with this game. As I mentioned, we subsequently were awarded a much larger grant for a phase 2 work. This allowed us to enroll 296 teens and follow them for 6 months. And you can see we were able to demonstrate statistically significant differences between the control group and the play test group in terms of a number of outcomes: attitudes, intentions, knowledge, self-efficacy. And all of this work, well, not all of it, but the majority of it was completed during the pandemic, which was a major lift. And we were really lucky to be able to collect 6-month data on upwards of 92% of our participants. So that was, major kudos to the team to be able to do this at the height of the pandemic. So around the same time that we were working on the play test game, we were awarded funding from the National Institute on Drug Abuse and the FDA to develop and test Smokescreen. And this is our game that targets smoking and vaping prevention in teens ages 10 to 16. It really focuses on teaching accurate knowledge and skill building to help teens avoid starting to smoke or vape, which has really been, a major epidemic that we've been dealing with. This began with a very simple prototype with funding from the pilot program at Dartmouth Center for Technology and Behavioral Health, which kind of gave us our first sort of bit of information of the impact of the game. We then conducted a pilot study both in New Haven, Connecticut and in Los Angeles, California to further test the game. We're able to demonstrate impact on knowledge, risk perceptions and beliefs related to tobacco products. And then we were awarded subsequent funding from the CVS Health Foundation as part of their Be the First Tobacco-Free Generation, which allowed us to do a field study, including 560 teens around the country in 4 states. And we were able to demonstrate, again, significant impact on their beliefs and knowledge around tobacco products. Our data from these studies was found to be compelling and rigorous. And so SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, is a major federal organization here in the US, included Smokescreen in their most recent evidence-based resource guide series. So that was very exciting and really rewarding in terms of being recognized for the rigor of Smokescreen. Moving on to our 4th game, Empower Ed. This game is a much shorter game experience, as I said, about 45 minutes. Targeting cognitive reappraisal, which focuses on reframing negative thoughts, self-efficacies, and teens' attitudes and beliefs about their own ability to change the way they think things around them. And you can see this game is much briefer, a less comprehensive experience. However, we were still able to demonstrate sustained impact on both cognitive reappraisal and beliefs and attitudes at 3 months in 100 Connecticut high school students. And so we can see that even a much smaller experience can have real impact. And finally, our most recent game is Play Smart, focuses on promoting mental health and preventing substance misuse with a particular focus on preventing the initiation of opioid misuse in high school students, so ages 16 to 19. And we are funded through the HEAL initiative, which stands for Helping to End Addiction Long Term, which is funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which we are one of 10 prevention sites around the country that are working in collaboration and alongside a coordinating center. And these are just some graphs which sort of say it all in terms of, the critical health crises in teens around substance misuse and mental health. These are US data, I think mostly from the CDC, and what you can essentially see from these rising curves is that, these have been dual epidemics and really problematic, especially for this younger age group. And so this grant opportunity was really a critical opportunity for us to be able to focus both on mental health as well on substance misuse, again, with a particular focus on opioid misuse. So as I mentioned, and like our other projects, we started this game development project with our target audience. We actually ended up engaging a real range of folks to do this formative work with, to do these interviews and focus groups, including teens who had never tried opioids, with prevention specialists, those who were in treatment, those who were in recovery, really to get kind of a 360-degree view of this issue around misuse of opioids. And what we heard from them and their stories, again, really ended up forming the basis for this game, and really helped us come up with these, as you can see, these salient themes that were identified as part of this formative work. And you can see here, identification of opioids. Again, you need to be able to have accurate knowledge and understanding to really have any sense of attitudes or risk perceptions. The perceived risk of harm, which is a major focus of this game, is giving them an accurate perception of risk of harm of opioids. Information about prescription opioids, what were sort of optimal modes of learning for them, accessibility of opioids, reason to misuse opioids, and then a number of areas around mental health really emerged as being critical to this discussion. Support systems, help seeking, and then sort of overall their sort of input on what a video game application targeting these areas might look like. So again, iteration. This was about a 16-month process with lots of back and forth with, again, our target audience, as well as this was another project with Shell Games. It was absolutely key that, for us to get this right, we had to get their input from both sides. What sort of the realities of being a teen and issues around substance misuse and mental health, and then from the game developer side, what was going to be most effective in terms of engaging our players in this content and this skill building. So you can see here, similar sort of look of our home screen. This is where we landed in terms of the storylines, which again is kind of our delivery of content, as well as our mini games, which are really the opportunities for skill development. You can see in the sort of the thought bubbles over Sabrina's head, the 6 stories that we came up with, again, with input from our team partners, as well as on the sides, you can see the skill building mini games that we came up with, focusing on risk, focusing on refusal, social media games, since that is a way that many people communicate these days. One focusing on stress, one focusing on knowledge, and then again, future sense, which is this notion of being able to look forward to see how your decisions have had impact. So this is just an example of one of the stories, which is called A Friend in Need, which again evolved out of our formative work with and contributes to our focus on mental health with this game. And the goal of this story is really to normalize talking about emotions amongst peers, to identify warning signs of emotional distress, and to suggest various approaches in help-seeking behaviors, including the support of a trusted adult. And in this case, helping, the character helps their friend Taylor talk to their school sports coach. So the idea isn't necessarily always to seek out a therapist or a clinician. There can be an array of trusted adults that can be a good place to start with. We do have another story that is really focused on mental health, that talks about how do you negotiate a relationship with a therapist? How do you find a therapist? How do you choose what are the important aspects of that relationship? But again, it's not critical that it be a therapist, and especially as a first step. And so this story, A Friend in Need, really helps you as the player and your player's character, help a friend in the game, find the help that they need. And so again, skill building, provision of accurate information is really the focus of these stories. So this is a story that focuses on opioid misuse and overdose. Here in the States, we are having a major overdose crisis related to opioids, and particularly fatal overdoses. So in this story, Grandma's Pills, the character, one of the characters in the story takes her grandmother's prescription pain pills. And the goal of this story is to highlight the consequences of sharing opioid prescriptions, empower players to encourage the prevention of opioid misuse within their own families, and provide the knowledge for players to recognize and respond to overdose and opioid use disorder in their own homes. So this actually plays out one of the characters, the sister, taking her grandmother's pills, which are not hers to take and not a safe thing to do, and suffering an overdose and having to sort of deal with that in this virtual world, so that the player learns the dangers of this kind of practice, and then also learns what one should be thinking about and what they should be doing in this type of an emergency. So it's a very compelling story and helps really firsthand drive home the dangers of misuse and how to deal with an emergency. So following development, as always, we launched into a pilot study because, again, we were dealing with the pandemic and schools being closed. We ran a virtual pilot study with 33 teams around the country, further revised our game to incorporate their feedback, and then launched our randomized controlled trial. Following completing the pilot study. As part of this HEAL project, we are also conducting an implementation study with sites around the country. This is to focus on evaluating the implementation of this game within school settings, as well as a cost evaluation or an economic evaluation, working with partners who are part of the HEAL initiative. For the randomized controlled trial, we've engaged 10 Connecticut high school-based health programs, with our goal being to enroll 532 16 to 19-year-olds, and they, similar to our other randomized controlled trials, are assigned to either play smart or a set of control games for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we collect data from them at baseline, just following completion of gameplay, and then 3, 6, and 12 months. And our primary outcome, our stated primary outcome, is to evaluate perception of risk of harm of opioid misuse at 3 months following baseline. So we are really looking, in addition to many other things that we're looking to impact their perception of the risk of harm of misusing opioids. This is our current baseline table. We have now, I think, enrolled over 330 kids, but as we hope with a randomization, you can see that we have a good distribution of gender, ethnicity, race, and age. I think age is cut off here a little bit for some reason because we also have 18 and 19-year-olds, but it's a good mix. You really want to have a good spread in terms of these different groups, and then also with randomization that they equally distribute to both the experimental and the control group. So in recognition of this work, we were featured in what was a really nice piece in the Washington Post, which is a large US newspaper, and actually also had interviews from folks at the World Health Organization talking about the opioid crisis, as well as video game addiction. So it was an interesting mix of topics. And then most recently, and something I'm really proud of, is that our games, including PlaySmart, were added recently as an important resource for mental health for use by the Office of the US Surgeon General. So that was a really important endorsement from that office. So just to quickly talk a little bit about, and I mentioned that we have spun out this new company, PLAYBL. Part of what PLAYBL is doing is really focusing, as the lab focuses on the research and development side, PLAYBL is focusing much more on the distribution side. Part of that has included creating this data dashboard. We did this work with partners at Deloitte. And what this dashboard does is it essentially takes all of the in-game data, as I talked about, the data that is produced by each game's software, feed it back through its backend system directly into this dashboard, so that if you're, say, an educator and you have a group of your students playing this game, or you're a clinician, you have patients playing this game, this is very, very rich engagement data. It tells you how long they play, what parts of the game they play, which parts they replay, this sort of calculation of the stickiness factor, how often do they come back and play. So this is really critical. We heard this over and over again from educators, that they really wanted to be able to see what their students or their patients were doing when they were playing this game and have objective data around that. We've also been able to integrate this dashboard directly with the servers where the games are hosted, so that backend, that data comes directly through the backend system to the dashboard and is put into a user-friendly, digestible format. And this is just a mock-up of where we hope to ultimately go with this dashboard, is that we'll be able to develop systems to really produce even richer data, not just engagement data, which obviously has a lot of value, but other data that we can look at that really shows us what players do in a video game and how that may reveal something about them in terms of their risks for certain outcomes. So that's sort of in the works. So I'm going to close, take 2 minutes to say thank yous. Thank yous to partners. Thank you to funders. This is I mentioned it's a collective brain, and could not be done without all of this support and input. Thank you to the hundreds of teams we've worked with over the past 13 years. They really have been the true partners, and none of this would have happened without them. Thank you to this team, our lab team, who is just fabulous. As you can see, they are almost entirely women, which I'm very proud of, and think, I don't think we did this by design, but it's been amazing that this is how it's worked out, and it's really been incredibly productive. And then just to circle back to these human beings, these 3 people who really were, again, my inspiration, my children, and they've turned out to be strong and independent and bright, funny people. So I'm really proud of what they led me to in my career. It's a big take-home message that, your own life can be, a huge source of thinking about what you want to do in your professional life. So, and then I'll just end on this this quote from Benjamin Franklin, which I think is very telling, and I try to apply to my personal as well as professional life. So I will end there, and thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lynn. So if anyone has any question, or I'm going to say this in Spanish, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, por favor, puede dejarla en el chat de YouTube. And while that happens, I have one question for you. So I was thinking about the in-game data, which, I'm interested in.
You've thought a lot about it, yes.
So I was wondering if the in-game data that you capture through your games was specified beforehand in while the game was in construction. So you were saying, hey, we want to capture this and this and this, and afterwards this will give us enough information. Or if it happened sort of like the other way around, and then for the next games you figured you had to do it that way. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the decision around that in-game data.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would say that it was really serendipity. It was not, certainly with the first game, we were very aware. So with Play Forward, when we started developing that game, it was actually just when the iPad was released from Apple, and so we saw it as an opportunity. I mean, the iPad was not even really out there broadly, but we saw it as an opportunity to use something that's very intimate, like hands-on, to develop that game there, not sort of recognizing all this data that came out through the game software. And so we would literally, after gameplay, everyone would bring their iPads back to the lab, upload all that data to the cloud, and then sweep it clean and then start over again. So I don't think we really didn't know what we were dealing with, but we were ending up with, millions and millions of these log files without really knowing what their value was. And I think it was ultimately a number of years later. So even with subsequent games, I don't think we were really thinking about the value of that in-game data. So none of it was intentional. And it came to sort of several years later where all of a sudden it was like, wow, maybe these data could really be valuable sources of telling us what kids learn in a game, how, what their experience is, how that may be related to the impact that we're able to measure with conventional methods. So we didn't really end up doing anything intentional in terms of, even with Play Smart, right? Even in the last, couple of years, in building something that would collect data in a certain way or a certain type of data. So future project.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I think we could swipe that around somehow. But I like that. Thank you so much. So we have a question from Salomon Salazar, and he says, what do you think about video games in patients with cognitive decline and how viable it is?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, I think video games, as sort of any other type of, interactive process, can have huge benefits in terms of, cognition, even measuring cognition. Colleagues at a game company called EPILOGUE, which is AKILI, developed a game specifically for older folks to improve their cognition. It was a racer game, so you would drive a racing car, and they were able to demonstrate, impact on cognition. So I think that, again, I think the key with any of these types of projects around serious games is that you have to be very intentional about what you're doing and thinking that, and I've learned, very clearly that just because sort of video games are sort of interesting or, a different delivery system, they have to be as rigorous as any other kind of intervention that you would create. So I think there's huge opportunities in impacting patients around, whether it's early dementia, whether it's ADHD, whether it's, other, sort of mental health conditions that, could really benefit from, a rigorously developed intervention that's very engaging, which is what video games are. So I think we've already demonstrated some success, and I think there's many opportunities.
Thank you. We have another question that says that, so most of your games are aimed at youth and adolescents, right? Based on your knowledge, do you think they would work for adult population? So how do you feel adults would receive games and video games specifically that aim at like health issues or whatever? Just
Right. I think, so as I told in my story, I moved more to a prevention earlier age group, thinking again, if we can, approach these issues when they haven't, individuals haven't yet started to begin, that could be, that could have certain value. But I think adults, absolutely. Absolutely. Here in the US, I think the most recent statistic was the average video gamer was like a 30-something-year-old woman. So, kids are, I think we always think of kids and games, but people love playing games and people love playing video games. And I think the key is to, obviously, as we do with our younger population, is start with that adult population, start the formative work with them, make sure that it's authentic to them. We could not, as a group of adults, pretend to know what is important to a teenager. I haven't been a teenager for a million years. So, and I would say that for, adults as well, is that you want to hear it directly from them. What is going to resonate? What is most likely going to impact them in whatever area you're looking to help or change for them. So I think adults are perfect. A lot of games are now being geared towards, and because I'm a medical doctor, I see this and I talk to a lot of people about this, towards changing physician behavior and creating games for physicians to learn how to interact with patients, how to have those conversations, how to, so I think any or all adults, whether it's for professional or their own health, I think games have huge applications.
thank you. This is a question from me, and I'm thinking about like machine learning models to work with data from the video games. So have you worked with that, or is that something that you're planning to do in terms of reproducing models and replicating that data to understand how this could like further impact, or in which other places it could be used, or stuff like that? Like I know Uche has a big interest in machine learning and she has been working with this. So I think, and we have people in the PhD, in the neuroscience PhD, who are highly interested in this topic. So that's why I'm posting the question here.
So, so let me make sure that I have the question right. So regarding in-game data, and sort of just briefly ask that part again, because I think I wasn't sure how different. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about like in-game data and building machine learning models with that data, and sort of like creating or replicating like the data from these games into different contexts, and just use that data in order to understand how that would impact other spheres, or just like understand if this is something that is like in the future interest. Because I think it would be, I'm just thinking on top of my head, but it's just like it would be interesting for people who use video games as behavioral resources to change behavior, or to just like impact some sort of prevention, or etc. To understand if there are models that they can use that could be helpful in terms of research and ultimately in terms of output,
Yep. I think that the process, I think the question and the approach totally makes sense. I think it's the process, right? So you create models that, are hypothesis generating, and then you test them, in a rigorous way. And I think, honestly, and as I presented in that early paper that we published, I guess, in 2018, this as a new source of data, these in-game data, I think just have enormous potential in terms of what they could tell us. We can't assume anything until we've gone through the process. And I think, machine learning models totally make sense. Again, it's only going to be as good as the process by which we go to create those models, and that's where I get wary, not wary, wary's too strong, but thoughtful, is that you just have to really say to yourself, we are doing the very best science, and to start to look at this, and that the process, again, the outcome is only as good as the process. But I think there's huge potential in doing this. And being a researcher who spent 20 years with a huge reliance on self-report data, which we know all the limitations in self-report data, having another source of data, as long as we really can demonstrate that it's valid, to me is so exciting. So
that's great. We have 5 minutes left, but there's another question in the YouTube channel. It's from Pablo Reyes, and he says, do you have studies of concordance between typical measures of mental health and scores from video games? And he adds SQR of WHO.
So, the most recent game, the PlaySmart game, is the one that has most heavily focused on mental health. And so we have a number of outcomes that we're collecting longitudinally from these students, or they are students, but participants. And so we will be able to, but I would love for them to reach out with what, if they have specific thoughts, because we're open to thinking about how to look at, that concordance. So I'd love to hear more. And, I'm happy to share my email, or you can share my email, or respond back to them with my email to talk more about that, because I think that's a really important discussion.
Perfect. Yes, Pablo is a professor of the PhD. He works with neuropsychology. So
good.
Yes, I will make sure to pass your email along to him.
That would be great. That'd be great. I think that's a great discussion. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's just really gets you thinking.
Perfect. So I think that's it. We don't have any more questions, and we're also out of time.
Okay.
I know I don't want to take more time of your time, which is very important.
No. Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for coming and for just like enlighten us with this information. I think it's very useful, especially for a program in which we're thinking or aiming to eventually create like a video game like based health program within the PhD. That's something I'm interested in, and well, I've been working around it for a while. So it was great to have you here. Just so you know, the recording will be posted online. So it will be on the YouTube channel, and that has shown us that is great because people can watch it offline, and that helps with a lot of views. So there were people that couldn't be here, but they will definitely watch it. And I will share that link with you in case you're interested to share it too.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Thank you so much for having us. Okay. Bye-bye.
Sounds good.